Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's Step into the Pivot. We are so happy to have you here and so happy to have Matt Mosich with us. Matt, welcome, and we look forward to our conversation today.
I'm incredibly excited. Thank you.
Of course. Yeah, we're really happy to have you here. Evie and I met Matt at a conference a couple years ago and have had some amazing conversations with him. So, we're super excited to have him here. So, Matt is somebody we always say you can read his whole bio, but for 22 years, he's been obsessed with communications. He spent 7 years in wealth management till he figured out kind of what his dream was. So, Evie, do you want to go a little deeper with that?
I am actually gonna let Matt tell us about what he feels is the most important for us to know because without spilling any beans,
Mhm.
because Matt and I spent a couple different calls prepping for this podcast, and we essentially had to do some inner work processes to pinpoint, how are you going to tell this story? Because you have so many pivots to choose from.
Yeah.
And one of the things you were highlighting, Matt, when we were prepping was how they all impacted each other.
hmm
And then, I don't really know where you're going to take us today because I know the big terrain
hmm
and I know your micro stories, but you're such an amazing storyteller. So that's something I want to highlight. And another thing I want to highlight about you that I really, was drawn to in terms of asking you for some advice and support myself is that you really pay attention to all the bodies: physical body, mental body, emotional body, spiritual connection, with this like something bigger than my left brain.
hmm
And then you bring all that together in a sense of integration and wholeness so that you can be of service to the financial industry. And I love that. And we really, in that way have so much in common.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
without further ado, tell us about life event or life events,
Yeah.
aka pivots, major pivot that
Yeah.
shaped you.
The past 5 years have effectively been pivot after pivot, but the one that surprised me the most was the day I passed my CFP, was the day I finally asked the question that allowed me to begin living for me. When I was in high school, I was incredibly jealous. A lot of people I was jealous of, but there was one person in particular, and I really liked the guy. Incredibly nice, incredibly kind, but he had something I wanted really bad. His name was Will, and Will was certain. Will knew exactly what he wanted to do with his life. He was going to be a pilot. He was already logging hours. He was going to a school, I think it was in the Midwest, that was known for being like the top flight school in the country. And I couldn't help but sit back and think, how? How does this guy know what he wants when I have no clue? So I looked at him and I kind of looked at everyone else and assumed that they were so certain. And that's what I wanted so bad, was certainty. I wanted to know what life was going to look like. I wanted to know what to do. I was tired of all this ambiguity. So the day I passed my CFP, I'm sitting there and I'm reflecting and I'm asking myself, I'm like, I'm looking ahead at my life and it's incredibly certain. Incredibly certainly good. I have a book of business lined up that I can take over. I'm going to be working with people who love me. I still love them. I'm going to have very manageable hours. I can go coach my kids' teams. I'm going to have a lot that people dream of. And I'm certain that it's going to bore me. And I'm sitting there finally with all that I wanted, realizing that I never actually wanted it. And that took me down a pretty long path. Ultimately, that led me to where I am today. But it was that day finally asking myself, is this what I want to do? That I realized the answer was no.
I so relate to this. I really remember keeping a secret from anyone of I have no idea who I'm going to be when I grow up. I
Yeah.
felt so much pressure growing up to know that, and I was able to come across as someone who was on a path. academic path,
Mhm.
good grades path.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling like such an imposter even in middle school because I had no idea that what I wanted, what was going to be a fit, because I was looking at these like prescriptions in terms of roles out there, careers, jobs out
Yeah.
there, and I was like, this ain't it, and this ain't it, and this
Mhm.
ain't it, and this ain't it. And, so just, we could keep going down that rabbit hole, but I just wanted to tell you, this is really cool how you're highlighting this. And I can't wait to hear more. So
Yeah.
tell us what happened then.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if I can distill anything to my son, and I try to distill to anyone who feels like they were in my shoes in some way, shape, or form, is that you don't have to know. And even now that I feel so certain that I know, I have this little piece of me that is open to the possibility that I'm wrong. After that day, though, was this meticulous ongoing process because I didn't go and just take my CFP for no reason. That was a very deliberate decision. That was me a year and a quarter before saying, this is my career path. This is what I want to do. And I'd grown this passion for what I was doing, and I was dead set on it. So when that question came up and I was looking ahead, there was also this other part of me that was like, no, you're wrong. This can't be the case. I spent the next year fighting with that. I wasn't ready yet to make this decision because at the other end of it was something really scary. What do I do? I had no clue. It wasn't like not this, then that. I think I realized 3 years later, 2.5 years later, that I would ultimately do what I'm doing today. So imagine me sitting at work, internally battling. Part of me thinking I'm wasting my time. Part of me thinking work hard, that's what you do. And there was this struggle that kept going on and on and on. And there are so many moments, and ultimately I'm happy I didn't act on them, though at the time I was kind of feeling like they might be the right thing, where I was at the verge of tears, just wanting to walk out, ready to just say, I'm done. I can't keep doing this. This isn't me. This isn't right. And ultimately, where it all came from was when I introed that this was the day I started to live for me. The hardest part about it was I also came to this realization that it just was never the path that I chose. In a way, yes, it was. Like I always did have a choice. I do realize that now. But I sat all of this time playing this inevitable blame game. Maybe not inevitable, but I played the blame game. I was blaming everyone else for where I was, for the fact that I wasn't living a life that I wanted to live. And that was a big part of it too. It was this like ongoing spiral of sit at work, be anxious, tell myself I need to figure out what that next thing is, but be so anxious and in my head that when I got home, I had no energy. So I'd ultimately do nothing. And then I wake up the next day and just beat myself up to the point where I had no energy and I do nothing. So that pivot ultimately allowed me to eventually get to another pivot where I then started to do something. But it was a lot longer of a process than I'd hoped. And that something in and of itself was something that has tripped me up a lot throughout my life is the expectations of how long something might take. But it was a long process of what might be the case, but an underlying fire that ultimately kept being fueled of, I need to figure this out.
So I was going to add, back to like kind of the initial thought process there. I think a lot of people go through that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not in exactly the same way as you do, but I talk to a lot of people who sit in a job for so long and
Yeah.
hate it or worried about being laid off or
Mm-hmm.
what's going to happen next or, have those Sunday scaries for so long. And then something forces their hand,
Yeah.
right? They get laid off, they get fired, whatever, something forces their hand.
Hmm.
And they realize, though, that they were sitting there scared for all those years, months, whatever,
Hmm.
and that what's on the other side is really better. It doesn't mean it was easy, it doesn't mean it took 3 minutes to find it, to your next point.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes we lose that. We don't trust ourselves. We don't think. I don't know what that feeling is. I mean,
Yeah.
Evie, I'd love to have your input here. Like, is it trust? Is it that we don't trust ourselves? Is it we don't trust the process? Is it that we don't think we can do it? And maybe it's probably a bunch of things, right? It's not just one thing,
Hmm.
Oh,
right?
yeah, totally. We're talking about a really complex ecosystem internally and externally. And maybe, Matt, we can go look at that, in
Yeah.
response to Teresa's questions, just by looking at that blame. So,
Yeah.
why do you think what was that really? What strategy was hiding there? And then what do you think you were avoiding by going into judgment and blame and complaining?
Yeah.
Super normal, totally understandable.
Hmm.
What do you think you were really avoiding? What did you after doing your work? Because we know, like
Yeah.
if we fast forward, Matt's done a bunch of inner work, and then really got to know some of these gremlins underneath the
Hmm.
blaming and the complaining. Like, spoiler alert,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
guy understands the layers. So
Yeah.
drop us down into the like, what was underneath that really that you ended up discovering when you sat down and explored the silence that we are avoiding by Netflixing and, you know.
I love that you said avoid the silence because it's so true. I have a vivid memory of the moment when this all clicked. I remember sitting in my living room. It was probably about this time of year because it was foggy, gloomy, cold day. And I'm sitting there and a thought passes through my mind and I just thought, it's all my fault. I always had a choice. And I realized in that moment, I was very upset. I was upset at my parents for guiding me down this path. I was upset with my teachers for telling me I was doing the right thing. I was upset at everyone. But in reality, what was underneath it all was that I was scared. I was scared to make a decision because if I made the decision, if I was wrong, I was to blame. But if I allowed someone else to make the decision, then I could just blame them. And it was never on me. Underneath that was a certain amount of trust, a certain amount of fact that like I didn't actually trust myself. I didn't trust myself that if I made a decision for myself, that I could then follow through on it, that I could then get back up if I had to make another decision inevitably. I just didn't trust myself. That day, I started the process of beginning to trust myself. But I think the thing that I was most unaware of that maybe people get caught up in, maybe that like you take a step forward and then you take two steps back, is if you were like me and you just allowed other people to decide for you for a really long time, then when you start deciding for yourself, you're a white belt. You're inexperienced. You don't know how to make decisions. You don't know that you have to keep making decisions. You don't really have a guide. So I think that part of what made me one step forward, two steps back for a little while was the fact that even if I was 26, 27 years old, that I was inexperienced at making decisions for myself. It's a skill. It's something that I had to learn. And going through that process is where the trust starts to build.
So interesting that you say that, because just from the perspective of, the clientele here at the center, I work with women who come after, well, they transition into a new state, being a widow. And so
Mm,
now here's someone with a big career and a big life and having done and accomplished so many things. And they are what I would call like level 7
yeah.
in their 70s. And they have, they've they speak the financial lingo, they've been in the industry, but now they were dealing with the personal change of, oh, it's just me. The couple is, has changed. My partner is beyond the veil right now, and here I go. Have to answer some of these questions that you're talking about right now. So
Hmm.
not 26, 76.
Yeah.
And, it is possible to go through life and have a big life experience, lots of adventures, but
Hmm.
avoid these fundamental, questions of, is this really for me? What do I really want? And
Yeah.
I somewhere along the lines, maybe when I was 6, or maybe when I was 2, maybe
Hmm.
when I was 6 months old, something started that got me thinking
Yeah.
it's all my fault. There
Yeah.
must be something wrong with me, that this is going on in my environment. I can't control it. Because you mentioned two really interesting things that are juxtaposed. You mentioned the feeling and the thinking that goes with it's all my fault. And then the one where you say, wait, if I actually give you my agency and you get to be the decision maker, and then you fail me, I get to be upset at you.
Hmm.
So, how do those two work together, and what have you done about it? Like,
Yeah.
what is the thing that you've done when you say I started doing something about it and taking some
Yeah.
actions?
I think first thing, it's all my fault. That brought a smile to my face. It was like me sitting there and realizing that the giving up of the agency, like the giving of the agency in them deciding for me, that was my choice. That was my fault. That was one of the most freeing statements that I'd ever said inside of my mind because I was like, oh, I can do something about this. This is my fault. This is my choice. So that statement was like a super positive statement. It allowed me to then say, okay, then the next step is my choice. So what was the next step? The next step was actually really practical. So about 2 years before that, our team had sat down and we read two books together. One of them was called The Index Card Business Plan. Some people in the audience may have heard of it. The man who wrote it, Brian Margolis, is around in our industry. But it was a really practical way to take your big goals and turn them into something that you could track on a weekly basis. Thing is, the first time that I'd read it, I'd had this little bit of an inkling that maybe this wasn't the path for me. So I always had a challenge as it came to like the business segment of it, because there's pillars of it, there's health, there's family. You can make it, it's not just always about the business aspect. But when it came to the business aspect, I had no idea what I should do. And realizing it was my fault, realizing that I could do something about it, I revisited this book and I still had the same question. What do I do about this business thing? Because I had no idea. I had no clue what I was supposed to do. So I came up with something ambiguous that I started to track. I started to track moments outside of my comfort zone. I spent a year and a half, 2 years doing just that. But you can't just put that on paper and say, I'm going to do this and then just make judgment calls. I defined what my comfort zone was. I didn't know exactly what I needed to do, but I knew if I was meeting new people, if I was getting out in the world doing networking events, if I was doing hard things and I defined what all those were on a weekly repetitive basis, something would probably happen. Guess what? It did.
It's given me so much to think about. So I'm really deep in thought here, right? Um, yeah, you really like I'm still back to the trusting yourself and um thinking I don't know, you really, Matt, have you've clearly done a lot of work and had a lot of thought process in this,
Mhm.
which I love. And you've come to some of those kind of revelations of where you want to be and who you want to be.
Yeah.
I don't even know what question to ask you
Yeah.
right now.
Well, let
I
me,
have a
I'm really
question for
thinking
you.
about
I have a question for Teresa, because
it.
I was because I've been, chatting with Teresa over the years a lot. Now, Matt, we're
Mhm.
listening to your story, and I'm wondering, what would you say about your sense of like, did you know who you were going to be when you grew up, and what the like, does this resonate? Because It
Oh,
resonates with me because I think, Matt, that's a super universal what you're talking about, except for that
Mm,
occasionally there are people who is like they they do have a calling and then they're, the
yeah.
question is, are they going to respond?
Mm,
But
and I think to answer your question, mine
yeah.
wasn't early on. I was very
yeah.
clear about what I wanted to do, and I did that, and I loved what I did until I didn't.
Mm,
Right,
yeah.
right. Like until closer to the end, and I've been very honest that I was completely burnt out. But like, so it took me a while to get. Same thing though. It took me a while to realize that and know who I wanted to be when I grew up. Mine just
Mhm.
came later in my career,
Yeah.
right? Because I kind of
Hmm.
always knew what I wanted to do. And I really did love that for all those years. But then
Yeah.
I got to the point where I didn't anymore, but I also
Mhm.
didn't know how to take that next step. And we've talked about this before, how I kind of lost my identity for a while
Yeah.
because I was always this person and now I wasn't anymore. And then who
Mhm.
was I going to be? So
Yeah.
I think that can really come. I think maybe the message here is exactly you pushed us this way is that can really happen to any of us at any time. It
Absolutely.
doesn't have to be when you're in your 20s. It can be when it's in your 50s,
Yeah.
right? I
Hmm.
mean,
Hmm.
it can be anywhere.
So when I was 26, I'm sitting there and all this is happening. You know what else goes through my head? I'm too late. I'm 26. I feel like I've
Yeah.
experienced the world.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there, I'm like, I'm too late. I can't do anything about this. I remember texting a friend about it, and he's like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine picking back up and starting and doing something new. Oh, doesn't that just overwhelm you? And I sat back and I'm like, oh, I guess it does. And underneath that became this feeling of I'm too late, I'm too old, I can't
Yeah.
do this. Reality is, and I have the privileged place of like having done a lot of this at a now realize a younger age, it's ultimately your decision whether or not you have the capacity to last through that change.
Well, I think though too, it's interesting that you say that in that way, right? At 26, because you potentially have 40 more years until you're of retirement age, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
how can you think that way? But I also understand it.
Mm.
And then like you have somebody like me where I realized that and I was in my late 50s, but I still wait, there's still there's still
Hmm.
that connection. And I hope that's really what our listeners get from this, from
Mm.
your story, Matt, is that it's never too late. And the other thing I guess I would say is right is that you really do want to love what you do. You don't
Yeah.
want to be worried about it every day. You
Mm.
want to really enjoy it. You just spend too much time at work.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. It's funny. So we're fast forwarding a little bit to come to where I am today. And we highlight, Teresa, you highlighted it beautifully. And the beginning of this conversation is my business is communication and speaking. This is something that came up when I was 8 years old and had been hidden in plain sight at the possibility of my ability to give it back to people. It wasn't all that obvious. But I now sit in conversations with people, and it's funny because what I do doesn't feel all that different from what I was doing before. There's a lot of similarities. It's just a slightly different conversation. But at the same time, the fuel, the fire, what's underneath it. I explained to people that part of what the biggest challenge of for me was is like there was all of this wonderful going on around me, but I saw this inevitable ceiling. Like I wasn't going to be able to get over the ceiling of my ability to be a great advisor because I couldn't go home to learn more about what I was doing. And how could I be truly great as a human, as a provider? If I didn't feel that same level of motivation. So really just to echo what you were saying is like it's not always obvious. It's not always obvious
Yeah.
what that something might be. It was 2.5, 3 years from the day that we began with that that someone told me that I could charge people for what I was already doing, that a light bulb went off. So part of it is hard because like there's this pressure underneath of figuring it out. But I think more than anything, it's if you're interested and you feel like you're not quite yet passionate, explore, do, get in a process of motion. Because I was going down an entirely different path when someone showed me the path that was clearly visible and better for me to go down, but it was only because I went down the wrong path that I found the right path.
It's taking
Hmm.
that time to think about that, right? And being willing to pivot when you
Yeah.
need to, when it becomes clear to you.
Yes.
So yeah, Evie,
How'd
I know
you
you have something to say.
reconnect? Yeah, he mentioned the 8-year-old. How did you reconnect with the 8-year-old? So what was the 8-year-old doing
Yeah.
that Matt today and maybe the Matt in 2028 will be doing?
When I was 8 years old, I was blissfully unaware of what was about to happen. I'm sitting there, it's my Pop Warner football banquet. We just won the championship, riding a little 8-year-old high. I'm thinking about the pizza and cake that we're about to be eating and the big trophy I'm about to get. When my dad and this woman who was dressed in like a formal business suit walk up to me and they proceed to hand me a piece of paper and say, "You're going to be introducing one of the teams today. Here's a script. You'll be going on in about 30 minutes." And I am just in a sheer panic. I've never spoken in public before. There's definitely something innate about that because it really scared me, especially because it was in front of 400 people.
Ooh.
But time came, I'm not 8 years old anymore. I walked up to that stage. I delivered said script. And immediately after, I'm flooded by my family, my grandparents, friends' parents, all telling me how much volume I'd spoken with, how confident I'd seemed, how great of a speaker I was. So I was fortunate. My first time on a stage was a good one, a moment that told me that I was good at this, which the truth was I probably did fairly well that day, but I wasn't anything special. I had way more moments over the next 20 years of failure than I did overwhelming success, but I had a belief to reinforce. So I kept on, like we talked about, Ivy, I was a little bit less resistant to raising my hand. And what that allowed me was opportunity.
Well, I think though you're not giving yourself credit as an 8-year-old, though, you probably were very amazing, right?
Sure.
People were amazed by you as an 8-year-old, right?
Yeah.
Honestly. And I think to your point, you have to fail. You have to
Yeah.
fail sometimes to grow, to
Hmm.
figure out what that looks like, right? If we don't fail and we're just always perfect,
Yeah.
well, then what's what else do I have to do? Well, I'll just stand up here and just be perfect all the time, which none of us are.
No.
So, I don't look at it as failure. I always look at it as learning. I
Yeah.
learn from those
Yeah.
experiences, right? I think that's what's important. I was gonna just kind of ask our final question, Evie.
Yeah.
Did you have something to add here, or
I I wanted to just reference the fact that you're a dad, Matt,
Yes.
and that you mentioned your son and
Yeah.
a little one, so that in addition to the fact that it's never too late,
Yeah.
because that's a false belief,
Hmm.
it's too late. It's never too late. It's also never too early.
Mm.
That you are role modeling something for this little one who is watching you and absorbing,
Yeah.
and you are, leading by example now. So it's never too early to learn some of these principles that it took you some, meandering and spiraling and exploration and guidance from other, trusted sources and,
For sure.
yeah.
challenges. And like Teresa's talking about growth through, failure also, you can by being a role model for your son, start instilling some of these principles. It's not too early to learn them.
Undoubtedly. For sure. It's the day he was born was the day I officially separated with my old firm. So he only gets to see this chapter.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Any final thoughts, Matt? We always ask, how was this pivot a step forward?
Yeah.
Can you just maybe, just give us a little brief there to end this great episode?
What I would say is the reason I chose this pivot, because there was an earlier one I could have shared. What this really felt like was the first step forward. This was the first moment where I decided to say, I'm not stepping left, I'm stepping right, I'm stepping forward, and that's because it's for me. So that was the moment where my life truly shifted from what everyone expected to what I wanted. And as hard as it was, I'm eternally grateful for it.
Yeah. And sometimes you just have to take that step, take that leap forward. And right. Like, so I love that about this conversation. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. We truly appreciate you sharing this. I loved this conversation. We could have definitely talked longer as far as I was concerned.
Yeah.
Evie, do you have any final thoughts? Anything you want to add before we close out?
Just thanks to both of you. It's just so, obvious that like, one person is willing to share, then that sparks something in somebody else. Just
Mhm.
inviting our listeners to consider, you know, these same questions for themselves. What are some of the thoughts that you're running on? What are some of these beliefs that maybe need upgrading? And
Yeah.
also notice how in this episode we highlighted a way of thinking about it's all my fault as a tool to actually start to feel a sense of like I can do something about it. Wait, I can do something about it. So just a little like pro tip, it's not really what you say, it's the energy that backs it up, right?
Hmm.
Because Matt just demoed here with this episode, there are a couple different ways to work with that phrase, at
Yeah.
least, right? So
Mhm.
thank you. What a great conversation. And thank you,
Yeah,
Teresa,
awesome.
for, being here
Yeah,
with me also. We
yeah.
appreciate you.
Thanks
Appreciate the
again.
opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Thank you so much. Thank you to Matt Mosich for being here with us today. Evie and I'll see you on our next episode. And remember, if you have a pivot, step into it.
Cheers.